Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I'm going to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning services that are customized to the pharmacy professional. You can learn more by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. All right, this week's question comes from a member of the YFP Facebook group who asks, I contribute to an HSA plan at work, but I'm just now noticing there's an investment feature to the account. Can someone explain how this works? Apparently, I have the feature turned off. I want to turn it on after getting an understanding about it. Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so sometimes this question reminds me a little bit about, sometimes I'll talk to, pharmacists that are early in their investing careers, and they'll say, oh, I set up like a mutual fund or whatever, and I'm investing. But then when we actually look at the balance, it's just in cash because they made the contribution, but they haven't made the actually transacted trade to get into the actual investment. So this is a little bit similar with an HSA, but this is a little bit of a harder thing to understand. So typically HSAs are connected to a third-party custodian that does like the invest in. So from experience, one of the HSA that we have, my wife has, it's connected to TD Ameritrade as the custodian. So, and it's kind of to be honest, it's kind of a pain in the neck to set it up. So you have to kind of go in and you say, okay, I want to invest. And every HSA is going to be different in terms of what they charge fees, what you can invest. So some HSAs is going to be first dollar that you can say, okay, once you put $1, you can move that from the HSA. So think of that as the bank portion to the investment portion and buy investments with that dollar. Some HSA, they're going to say, hey, we want you to meet at least like $1,000 threshold. So once you have $1,001, and you can move that $1 over to the custodian to invest, and that's how you do it. But it's often set up as like a separate login. So you go in and you say, okay, sweet, I have $5,000 in cash in my HSA, and I think I can invest it. So how do I do that? In some cases, you can invest with the HSA. In a lot of cases, they're going to send you to a third party, and they're basically going to like kind of internally transfer or sweep those funds over to the investment account. So then, in that example, if you have $1,001, the $1,000 stays in your HSA, the $1 goes over to say a custodian like TD, and then similar to an IRA, you can go in there and pick a mutual fund or whatever that looks like to invest. Unfortunately, this isn't like a uniform process for all HSAs. It's going to be a little bit different. So if you get into a bind, I would call the HSA provider and say, hey, like, how do I functionally do this? Some of the frustration part is that there can be sometimes a back and forth was like, okay, we'll contact this company, and then, then the custodian doesn't really know how the HSA connects because they're working with, large, investors and things like that. So that's just been my experience. So it can be a little bit of a lift. If you don't like your HSA, you don't have to stay with your HSA, even if it's through your employer. Now you kind of have to kind of do some hoop jumping to get your employer if they give you a match to do that. But you can go out and say, okay, this is my HSA that I want to use. It's first dollar. The fees are low. The investments are good because even the investments that are available to you won't be necessarily the same for everybody. This is what I want to do, and go from there. But it does take a little bit of a manual process, at least in my experience, to go from, hey, there's money in account, cash, that I'm using this as a stealth IRA, a long-term investment, to get it into a long-term investment if that's the way to go. And unfortunately, it's not like do this, step 1, step 2, step 3. Everyone is going to be a little bit different, which makes it a great tool for you, but hard to kind of get in place, in practice, if that makes sense, Tim.
Yeah, no, Tim, that's a great overview. And what comes to mind here too is, just like we talk about being intentional with our plan for investments. What's the goal? What's our risk tolerance? What do we need it for? What are we thinking? What's the vision for how we're using those funds? Same thing for an HSA, right? Because we're putting that money potentially into the market, unless you decide to, put it into the HSA and leave it there in a cash position, which certainly still has tax benefits. But if you choose to take that step for an investing standpoint, we want to be thinking about how might we be projecting we're going to use this?
Yep.
And I think is it shorter term? Is it long term? Are there known expenses? Are there not known expenses? Again, risk tolerance, all those things are going to inform how we allocate those funds.
Yeah, and that's really the second phase, or maybe even should be the first phase. Even because you could say, hey, I don't, maybe I shouldn't be investing it, but like if you say, hey, I do want to
Right.
invest it, then the risk and the allocation associated with that is going to be, because again, if you were allocated it very aggressively, you put in an S&P 500, but you're like, oh, I need this for a baby that's coming soon, then you don't really want to use that investment for that, because all of your investments are depressed right now because of where the market is. So yeah, definitely taking a step back and assessing the goal, and what is the purpose for this HSA,
Hmm.
which doesn't necessarily have to be for health expenses. Is going to be an important step to go through as well.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time period just to remind folks of that, right? We're obviously in a down market in the moment, and I looked at my HSA the other day and saw the noticeable dip where it's much less than the dollars we had put it in, and that's okay, because we're thinking about it from more of a long term perspective. But I think sometimes with HSAs and even other parts of the financial plan, we tend to only think about the upside, of the plan longer term. Certainly there's tax benefits. Certainly, if we have that money invested over a long period of time, hopefully the market's going to work its magic. It's going to do its thing. But obviously what we don't want to do is if we have known short-term expenses or even unexpected expenses that are, not known, that we're frustrated that, hey, we just put in, the max for the year and now we don't even have that much because the market dipped.
Yeah, and I think 2 points here. One is like there's two sides of a coin here. So the one would be, um, man, it really stinks. The market is down, and I had X and now I have Y, and Y is considerably less. The other way to look at it is, hey, I'm putting money into my HSA every month.
Right.
So those investments that I were buying for $100 a share, now I can get twice as many because I can buy them at $50 a share, because prices are depressed. So when the market rebounds, that's where dollar cost averaging really helps you hedge, in a down market, to say, okay, my dollars are going a lot further as I put them in, assuming that you're doing that. Most people are doing it, at least in a 401k or a 403b. So that's one way to look at it. I think the other way to look at it again is, if this HSA is needed for a more near term, thing, like, hey, I need this cash in the next year, so I really shouldn't be investing at all.
Right.
So it's just like similar to retirement. Like if you're investing in all equities this year, 100% equities, and then you're looking to retire next year, like, you're in the wrong allocation, right? Because the closer you
Hmm.
get to that target, the safer you need to be. Because,
Hmm.
and again, right now, volatility, no matter what you're invested in right now, is getting beat up. So volatility is a real thing, but
Yeah.
it really means, one is keep in perspective. Again, I heard this, I'm gonna steal this, like, when in doubt, zoom out. So right now you look at the markets and you're like, man, this is terrible. I always say, I want to take my investment ball and go home. But if I zoom out and I look at the bigger picture, what the
Yeah.
market has done for us over 100 plus years, takes care of us, right? So whether it's
Hmm.
an HSA, whether it's an IRA, a 401k, we feel those losses, but we just have to kind of think of the big picture, which sometimes we have a really hard time doing.
Hmm. Two additional resources I'm going to link to in the show notes. We've talked about the HSA several times on the podcast and the blog. Episode 165, we talked about the power of an HSA account. And then we also have a blog post that talks about kind of the optimization side of the HSA. So, some folks, obviously, there's known medical expenses, taking advantage of the tax benefits, using those funds for those known expenses. For other folks that are trying to leverage it more as a long term savings vehicle, we've got some more information on that as well. We'll link to both of those in the show notes. Great question again from the YFP Facebook group. If you're not already a member of the YFP Facebook group, I hope you'll join more than 8,000 pharmacists across the country that are connected with one another, asking great questions, encouraging one another in their own financial journey. And if you have a question that you'd like to have featured on an upcoming Ask a YFP CFP segment of the show, you can send us an email with your question, info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or you can record your question by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask YFP. As we wrap up this week's episode, an important reminder that the content in the podcast is provided for informational purposes only, is not intended to provide, and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. For more information on this, you can visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks for listening and have a great rest of your week.